Chapter 6. Isaac was telling Klein he was in danger of hypothermia again, so we moved up the street to the west, remembering there was a subway entrance near the Flatiron building. He could take shelter under Broadway.
Body temperature is critically low.
Klein passed a boarded-up Sister Track store and the foyer to an apartment building, the doors left open. He was about to go down the steps into the subway station when he saw a light up ahead, something big, bright, and not at street level. Curious, he jogged a little further, keeping a weary eye out. He came to the corner, looked up, and recognized the Flatiron building. There was a huge floodlight tracing circles along the east side of the building that was facing him. There had been a large Sierra relief station at the foot of the building, and the floodlight had been to attract survivors and disperse food, supplies, and medicine to them. The Flatiron building was another iconic landmark of New York, so named because of its triangular shape resembling that of an old clothes iron. It had been completed in 1902, and though it was only 21 stories high, it had been the tallest skyscraper in New York at that time. The Flatiron was just a dark shape looming into the sky, except for the Christmas light wreaths in the windows. A PA system activated on an automated loop.
Attention. Weather services indicate an increase in storm intensity and duration. Civilians are advised to remain indoors unless absolutely necessary.
The moving spotlight and PA system were all under a blanket of snow and had been long abandoned for weeks now. But they were still working as they were programmed to, even if nothing else was. It was melancholy, the grand landmark and station looking so desolate. Klein turned and headed down the steps into the subway station, rubbing his hands together and stamping his feet to get the blood circulating. Ahead, there was a boarded-up subway storefront someone had graffitied with a cartoon character that looked like a Rambo wolf, complete with red headband and a machine gun blazing away. The passageway turned right into the storefront and opened up into the station proper. The station was completely empty of life. There were platforms on each side, but there were several tracks running through the middle of the station for trains that weren't stopping here, so the platforms were very far apart from each other. Ceramic tiles covered the walls, the floor, foam tiles covered the ceiling to help soften the echoes, and tiles everywhere. Cardboard and trash littered the platform. The walls were rife with layers of signs and more graffiti. Klein noticed the first layer was from before the outbreak. Planned service changes due to construction. And then the post-outbreak signs. Sierra emergency instructions. Leave subway and go to the nearest Sierra center for evacuation and further instructions. And then, the chaos afterwards. Graffiti on top of the signs with phrases like, "Sierra screws us, give us the vaccine now, and it's not the flu." Trash cans were turned over. Bulging garbage bags were stacked in the corner. ATMs and ticket booths stood dark and were surprisingly unmolested. But once it was discovered and announced that the virus had spread on dollar bills, everyone avoided cash like, well, the plague. As he walked north across the station, Klein looked across the darkened subway tracks to the other side of the station. It was only the other side of Broadway, just a quick jog to reach it, but it seemed so far away, like the other side of an immense, bitterly cold and empty chasm. He seemed safe enough from the hostiles for the moment, so Klein opened up his holo map. He was just 3 streets south of the DZ now. The southernmost wall of the DZ was across the street of Madison Square Park to the north, and there was a checkpoint there. Klein started going over a mental checklist of everything he needed before going into the dark zone. He realized that he still needed to find and craft a new mask and virus filters before he could go in, but the map showed that there was a hideout just west of Madison Square Park. Being close to the DZ, it was a good bet that anything he would need for filters would be there. He reached the north side of the station and turned right towards the corridors leading out. The first thing he saw were more walls covered with missing posters, but also some makeshift memorials. There was a huge Sierra billboard on the wall to his right, telling people to make sure they wash their hands. These signs popped up all over the city weeks after Thanksgiving. Wash your hands, don't touch your face, help stop the spread, etc. There was a corridor to the east, steps going up to street level and exiting across the street from where he had gone down, and another corridor to the north. He looked at the little memorials people had put up in the east corridor. Candles, flowers, signs, wreaths with portraits, and most heartbreaking, little toys. Klein knew why they had been put down here. Madison Square Park was nearby, and most of it had been dug up to bury loads upon loads of Sierra coffins. But it was full of viral contamination, and people couldn't go there to mourn their dead. So, they went to nearby places like this. He had seen the same thing in the West Piers and many other places all over the city. He was tempted to linger. He still hadn't had a chance to mourn his own family or put up a memorial yet. But he knew better. He jogged up the north corridor. More trash bags and boxes in the hallway, a broken vending machine, but just before the steps leading out, another graffiti caught his eye. "Sierra sucks my balls," was at the top. But under that, "I'll sneeze and I'll freeze and I'll blow your life away." Seeing the big bad wolf's phrase adapted like that, it pissed him off, and it made him sad at the same time. It reminded him of something that he had heard Rick Velassi say on the radio about New York. It's a ghost town, but not empty, just haunted. It feels like a place that's dead and fucking angry about it. He was lingering, again, because it was time to go back up into the cold. He came up the steps and he could see the gate and the huge fences around Madison Square Park straight ahead. There was a dump truck stopped just inside the gate with the back opened up, always a sign to watch out for cleaners. As he crossed Broadway, going past the dump truck, he noticed a rucksack leaning against it. He looked around, making sure no one was coming, opened the rucksack and saw a beautiful sight. A nice, thick gray hoodie. Klein didn't waste a moment. He flipped off his sling pack, stripped off the duct tape at his wrist and hazmat top, and slipped on the hoodie. The hoodie was cold at the moment, but it would warm up and he wouldn't be freezing in his own sweat. Up ahead, across the street, there was a copper angel shining through the fog and driving snow because of the spotlight underneath her. Beneath her, there were some simple yellow Christmas lights strung between street lamp poles. There was a Christmas market sign and a few rows of Christmas trees that would never be sold, and a handful of kiosks sitting in the snow. He was about to go into the hideout when he looked back. He saw a few police cars together on the road and went over on a hunch. Sure enough, on the other side of the cars, he found a weapons parts bag. He rifled through it and was surprised to find some large P90 magazines. He got an idea, grabbed the mags, and went inside the hideout slowly, only to gaze up once more at the angel as he passed her. The hideout was a lobby of a hotel. Wood paneling, no fluorescent lighting, all tasteful recessed light cans, and a few minimalistic lamps. It needed some cleaning, but it was a nice change of pace to be in a place with some elegance. There were 2 square pillars in front of him, and then a large column just in the front of the elevators on the other side of the lobby. The elevator doors had biocontamination tape strung across them, but nowadays you couldn't trust that. People had started stealing the tape from contaminated places and putting it across entrances to their own place to make people avoid them. But all he was interested in at the moment was the crafting bench set up against the huge column. Klein slipped off his sling pack and took stock. The pain was creeping up on him again and he was getting hungry. He pulled a can of chili out of his pack and another syringe out of his pocket. He was hoping for a little camp stove burner in the corner somewhere, but he couldn't find one, so he ate the chili cold. While he ate, Klein thought about the idea he had outside. He had hooked up his pulse at the last hideout, but considering the mob he had been dealing with, he really wished he had put his turret ability online instead. The magazines he had found outside were for a P90, and SHD turrets were basically modified P90s. Klein found an SHD turret under the crafting table. SHD agents frequently dumped weapons and gear in hideouts and checkpoints when they needed to switch loadouts. It was not okay to touch another agent's stuff, but Klein would have to make it up to whoever this belonged to. The turret was based off of the FNP-90 submachine gun, due to its high-capacity magazine and sleek design, less edges and protrusions to catch on things. The turret had a robotic base with legs that folded up when it was inactive, and an aiming mechanism that fired where Isaac told it to. From the polarized residue around the barrel and the "My Little Friend" that had been painted on the side, it was obvious that the turret had been well used. The magazine held 50 rounds and sat on top of the turret body rather than sticking out of the bottom like most guns, but the mag on the turret was empty, and when Klein held the test button down, the turret didn't move at all. It was out of juice. Klein went through his sling pack and found some batteries and ammunition and started reloading the mags from the weapons parts bag he had rifled through just across the street. He tested the turret, making sure it could deploy, retract, and aim, and then moved on to his mask, the one he had found in the apartment next to the rooftop. The mask was good, but it didn't have filters, which he would have to have before going into the DZ. Preferably a strong virus filter so he could go down in the subways and other heavily contaminated areas where some hostiles might not dare to go. One of the reasons the green poison had been so virulent was that dead bodies gave off gases after death as they continued anaerobic biological processes, and the viruses could be airborne in still enclosed spaces. In the dark zone, everyone wore masks with filters to avoid contamination. The amount of bodies had begun to overflow their ability to process and bury them, so lots of bodies had been left in subway stations, rooms and alleys that became more heavily contaminated. Klein looked through his sling pack, finding some cotton fabric and very fine foam and duct tape. He created a crude filter by cutting up and taping the foam into two shapes that fit into the existing filter assemblies, and then putting a few layers of cotton over the foam, packing it all together. It would add more virus filtration in the underground areas, but he made note not to rely on it for too long. Klein left the hideout through the east door, looking for a moment at the west side of Madison Square Park. It was a park full of trees. One of the oaks had been transplanted from the estate of James Madison himself, for whom the park was named. But the whole park was being dug up to bury the dead and had been surrounded by 20-foot-high fencing, topped with razor wire. All he could see of it were the bare branches of the trees poking above the fence line, which had long since shed their leaves for the winter. Klein turned left and jogged north, to the southern wall of the dark zone. Fifth Avenue street lamps provided cones of soft yellow light, illuminating hundreds of snowflakes whizzing by in the blizzard winds. Pale fluorescent green light spilled out from underneath a huge quarantine banner, silhouetting razor wire at the top of the wall straddling Fifth Avenue. As he moved around an abandoned pretzel trailer, there was a checkpoint just up ahead. Marching LED lights above the door announced, "Warning, virus, quarantine, turn back." But the door was covered with snow and ice. The blizzard had blown snow into the recessed entry and covered it completely. Klein used the butt of his M4 and banged on the door and yelled, but no one answered. Klein groaned in frustration. He suspected that every checkpoint had been locked up like this. During a blizzard, there was no reason to man the checkpoints for agents to come and go. Any sane agent would be hunkered down for the duration of this storm. There were other ways into the dark zone, but with the blizzard raging, they felt so far away. He had been thrown out of a helicopter, skewered his arm on a nail, run for his life from gangsters and murderers in a dark, freezing blizzard, and he was getting tired of this shit. Klein turned around and looked at the huge fencing around Madison Square Park and remembered all the bodies being buried there. He remembered the memorials, candles and flowers and toys in the subway less than 100 yards away. The antivirals could stop more of that heartache. He took in a deep breath and opened his map again. There were a handful of alternate entrances to the dark zone. He called them drop-downs because you had to climb up and drop down over the wall to get in. Agents tended to use these whenever it seemed like too many hostiles were hanging around checkpoints waiting for someone to come out. The closest drop down was to the west, next to Broadway. Klein grimaced, banged the checkpoint door once more in frustration, and headed west along 29th Street. Miles to go before I sleep, Klein thought to himself, the poem of Robert Frost popping into his head as he set off into the dark night. There were pools of soft light coming from the street lamps on the south side of the street. There was one floodlight on the dark zone wall casting some harsh shadows across the street. There were huge rolls of biohazard plastic stacked on either side of the street, on the ground, and on flatbed trailers, but mostly there was just the dull roar of the blizzard. Klein passed another sign on the DZ wall. Quarantine. Martial law is in effect. Report all suspected cases of infection. Do not attempt to leave their premises. Deadly force is authorized. Klein came to Broadway, where the wall bent inwards. They kept the barricades perpendicular to the street for some engineering reasons. The fencing went up several stories high, and there was blackout material stapled to it going all the way up. Not being able to see inside made the dark zone more terrifying somehow, but Klein doubted that this was why the wall had been built so high. After Broadway, another place on the wall with lots of missing posters and warning signs. Police notice, warning restricted area, and biohazard signs. If this wasn't enough to scare you off, there was an in-depth explanation. There is a real and deadly danger of contracting or spreading smallpox variola chimera. And it went on, but that was as far as Klein read. As he passed another shuttered Most 24 store, Klein heard gunfire and shouting from an alley just around the corner. He triggered his pulse and could see a couple of figures fighting with two other figures in the alley, plus two more figures coming down 29th towards him. He crouched behind some newspaper vending machines on the north side of the street and debated what was the best action to take. There were a couple of Rikers fighting a couple of looters. The Rikers were advancing on the looters, keeping the looters' heads down with a barrage of fire from their guns while they got closer. But then, a looter tossed an incendiary grenade in their path. One of them dived out of the way, but the other was engulfed in fire and screamed as he tried to put out the flames before burning to death. As the other Riker ran for cover, both looters shot the burning one. Then it was 2 against 1, and they were able to take out the second Riker, just as the other 2 coming up the street turned down the alley. Between the 4 of them, they had 2 pistols, a shotgun, and a rifle. With his perfectly calibrated guns and gear, Klein could have taken them all out by himself, but all that was in the boo right now. With his janky gear and turret, it was iffy. Klein waited until they were all in the alleyway, then tossed his turret across the street on top of the minivan, giving it a good angle on the alley. It oriented itself in midair, extending a robotic leg to absorb the fall. It quickly scanned its surroundings and chirped as it detected the Rikers. They knew what that sound meant, and they wasted no time. "Get down!" one of them yelled as they all went for cover. This was what Klein was waiting for. As they took cover, the turret fired a few bursts at them. He rushed across the street, taking cover behind the minivan. The turret kept firing, and the Rikers stayed put until Klein tossed a tear gas grenade that landed right in front of the junk they were sheltering behind. The grenade exploded with a loud hiss, spreading the gas as they stumbled up to their feet, trying to get away from it. He took them out one after another. Bim, bam, boom. Klein reloaded his gun, stowed his turret, and looked them over. One of them was about his size, and there wasn't any blood on his coat. It felt gruesome to do it, but he needed a coat, and it looked rugged and warm, so he stripped it off the dead man and put it on. They had some ammo, but that was about it. With all the forage clothes he had found, the blizzard was still cold, but not so deadly as before. Klein continued along the southern wall of the DZ and came to the corner of it, just past Broadway. The Passway project was right across the street to the west. It was a high-speed rail project, and this station was going to bring trains into downtown Manhattan and connect New York to the rest of the rail line. It would eventually have a sweeping curved steel roof with elegant escalators down to the tracks, but it was a little more than a 30-foot hole in the ground right now. At some point, Sarah had begun storing coffins down there rather than burying them. Then the cleaners started dumping bodies there and trying to burn everything. Or they would if SHD agents didn't stop chasing them away. They always came back, and he supposed that they were probably down there right now. Klein had been down there before. There were loads of tools, some stockpiled gear, guns, and grenades too. He was still 5 blocks from the Dark Zone dropdown, but he was way less geared up than usual. It wouldn't take long to make a detour and see if he could beef up his loadout. Klein jogged through an open gate in the chain-link fencing, past some trucks, and came up to the steps leading to the entrance. There was a plaza for foot traffic in and out of the station, with trees ringed by benches, and a concrete art installation that looked like 5 huge dominoes with LED lights along the sides and in the holes at the top. At the top of the steps, Klein looked up at the curved steel supports and down the huge concrete hole. Through the snowfall, he could see figures walking around down there and the pilot lights of their flamethrowers. Sure enough, there was a New York City dump truck parked at the top with the back opened up. There was a huge pile of burning bodies at the bottom of the hole, and a horrible smell was reeking despite the cold and the blizzard. Klein put on his mask to screen out the stench. There were stairs going down to the main level, but on the left side, they were blocked off with construction material and equipment. Klein crept down the stairs to the right, peering over the barriers. He could see 3 hostiles, but he was sure there were more. He crept closer. There were 2 cleaners in firemen's suits with gas masks, holding rifles with homemade flamethrowers attached. There was another in a hazmat suit with a pistol and at least 1 bag of grenades. Klein had a couple of grenades but didn't want to use them unless he had to. He triggered his pulse, raising his M1 and searched for targets.
"If we could stick together a little longer, we could finish what we started,"
one of the cleaners said, muffled by his mask.
"Joe would be proud,"
the hazmat cleaner said. Klein's first shot went right through the mask of one of the firemen cleaners, who crumpled without a sound. The other 2 panicked and scrambled, but not before Klein managed to hit the hazmat cleaner in the shoulder. He stood and aimed at the second fireman cleaner, waiting until he peeked over the cover that he had hid behind, and then putting him down with 1 shot. He slung the M1 and drew the M4, moving in on the hazmat cleaner, who was trying to find a grenade in his bag while he held a hand over the wound in his shoulder. He advanced towards the last cleaner, who ran back towards the escalators. Klein took aim and fired, putting him down before he reached the escalators. As the cleaner went down, Klein's eyes caught movement coming around the corner next to the escalators. Something big. Another cleaner came out from behind the corner, looking like he might have been a linebacker in a past life. He was wearing baggy clothes and a backpack made of cobbled together bottles of tanks of all kinds of flammable liquids and gases. He carried a huge flamethrower, which he fired into the air. It looked like a dragon clearing its throat. His face was hidden inside a mask, but the fire made the circular eyes glow yellow. He was a hulking, hellish thing silhouetted by the fluorescent light behind him. The hellish thing took aim and fired at Klein, who dubbed him Hellfire at that moment. A stream of white-hot flame shot over his shoulder, and Klein ran for cover, panic sending adrenaline surging through his bloodstream. The first thing he thought of was his grenades. This guy couldn't move quickly with all that gear he was walking around with, but Klein wanted him to back off. Now. Hellfire was lurching closer and firing another blast at his cover. Flames licked around the corners while Klein tried to clear his head, grab a frag grenade, and prime it. Klein turned and looked as the flames receded. Hellfire was about 12 feet away. Not smart to use a grenade at this distance, but he had to do something to slow him down and get some distance. He tossed the grenade so it landed a few steps behind Hellfire and he only hesitated long enough to see the massive cleaner start to turn around before he started running. Hellfire turned around and kicked the grenade away. He turned again to see Klein running away, going around the huge hole in the middle of the floor. Just as Klein reached cover, Hellfire opened fire again, blasting heat and fire, but Klein zigzagged out of the way and out of range. Klein considered his options. This cleaner had some chops. He had known that there was enough time to kick the grenade away, whereas most people would just panic and run. He also had some armor, which could cost Klein precious seconds trying to shoot through. That flamethrower could end him, but not without giving him a lot of pain first. The only play was to go for Hellfire's propane tanks. Klein saw two, one hanging from his backpack, poking out from his left side, and another on top of his backpack that would be harder to hit. And just as he thought of this, he heard a familiar clink sound and knew that Hellfire had just chucked a grenade at him. Isaac helpfully showed a red patch on the ground, so he knew the blast radius of the grenade, and he scooted out of the red, but was unable to stay in cover. Klein leaned out from his cover far enough to take aim with his M1 and aimed for the large tank dangling from the left side of Hellfire's large backpack apparatus. He held his breath and slowly squeezed the trigger, making a direct hit, but his shot ricocheted off the metal of the tank. This did not please Hellfire. Another scorching burst of white-hot fire streamed out and set fire to his cover. Klein pulled back behind the cover, but got ready to take another shot. Hellfire was yelling something through his mask, and Klein couldn't make it out. Was he taunting him, or was he calling to other cleaners to back him up? Klein popped up, looking over his cover, and took aim again. He flinched, just as he was pulling the trigger, as he belatedly realized that the top of his cover was burning hot from Hellfire's assault. His shot went wide and missed. Klein pulled back behind the cover, grimacing as he cycled the bolt of his M1 again, discharging the spent cartridge and putting the next bullet into position for the next shot. Hellfire had halved the distance to Klein's new cover and was now about 20 feet away, still coming slowly but surely, blasting his cover once more. "Come on," Klein thought to himself, "third time's the charm." Just as he was about to take another shot, another terrible clink came, and Isaac was showing Klein that he was right in the middle of the blast zone. The timing was wrong. The grenade wasn't from Hellfire. He got up and ran up the steps that he had come down minutes before and took cover at the top, crouching behind the corner, his shoulder to the wall next to the stairs. Hellfire fired another blast, and Klein felt the heat on his back and neck before taking cover. Klein tried not to think about the possibility of dying a fiery death. Just breathe, then take action, he thought to himself. He switched to his M4, readying the weapon at his chest before turning, leaning out of cover, and shooting at Hellfire's left side propane tank once more. Hellfire was waiting for him and started blasting fire in his direction. Klein felt a blast of heat, but he knew it was now or never. If he couldn't pop his tank and take him down now, he had to leave empty-handed. Klein held the M4 steady, pelting Hellfire's tank with bullets, and then he finally heard the hiss and knew the tank had ruptured. He stopped firing. Hellfire stopped, looked down, and then looked back at Klein right before the tank blew. Klein pulled back into cover, shaken, and realized his arm was on fire. He patted out the flames and realized that some wrist and forearm skin had been burned. It hurt, but like the bullet graze on his hip, he could manage and keep going. Klein leaned out to see Hellfire getting up. The blast from the tank had blown Hellfire off his feet and banged him up, but now he saw that other cleaners were coming up from the lower level to help Hellfire. Klein started backing up, getting ready to run. There was probably some great gear and supplies down there, but he had to play it safe. Then, Klein remembered he had a turret now. He cursed himself for not using it earlier. Klein focused on Hellfire. If he could finish him off, the rest should be easy. He tossed his turret on top of some scaffolding and materials near the cleaners. While they were scrambling to take cover, Hellfire lobbed a grenade of his own as Klein aimed at Hellfire's grenade bag. Isaac showed him that Hellfire had thrown the grenade too far, so he opened fire with the M4. Half a second later, the grenades blew and Hellfire crumpled to the ground. Klein quickly dealt with the other two cleaners, taking them out with his M1, and then he went down through the subway morgue, finding a few tools, another grenade, more medicine, and best of all, a tack vest with ceramic plates and a bigger backpack. Klein could have taken more time to search, but what he had found was good enough and his mask was not screening out all of the stench of the burning bodies. On his way out, he noticed that one of the cleaners had an M870 shotgun. It was in poor condition, but Klein took it. There was another hideout just west of the subway morgue, and he decided to stop there before he hit the dark zone. He hoped there was something in there to help his burned forearm, and maybe he could do something with the M870. Not going to be easy, but at least you're halfway there, Klein thought to himself. The bullet grazes and burns are going to be more than worth it. The hideout was another fire station. Klein unlocked and slipped under the sliding door, locking it behind him. Slapping his palm on the other side of the big red truck still inside, and went to the workbench. The first thing he saw was a multi-launcher with first aid canisters, and he smiled. The multi-launcher could be used for launching various high-tech ordnance, including sticky bombs, but it could also launch canisters of first aid nanites that could help heal all kinds of wounds, cuts, hemorrhages, and burns. The launcher had a hinge in front, and Klein opened it, pulled out an empty canister, put in a fresh one, and holstered the gun. The launcher could be used to support squad mates who were getting banged up during combat, or it could be shot to the ground beneath your feet to heal yourself. You could also trigger a canister manually, by gripping it tight in your fist and pressing down hard on the tip with your thumb. SHD tech was disabled inside hideouts and safe houses, so you would have to wait until outside, but he put the canister in his pocket. He replaced the turret kit on the sling pack with a pack of nanite canisters for the multi-launcher. There was only space for 2 kits at a time, so he would use the Pulse and the first aid multi-launcher for now. The shotgun was gas-operated, meaning it could reload itself from the expanding gases created from the ignition of the gunpowder inside the shells it fired. It could fire shotgun shells semi-automatically and could come in very handy in the dark zone at close range. With the improved tack vest, backpack, and shotgun, and the first aid nanites, it was time to enter the DZ. Chapter 7. Outside, Klein grabbed the canister in his fist and pressed down tightly on the cap with his thumb. The cap popped inwards, and a swarm of nanites dispersed around him in a cloud, most finding their way to his skin. The nanites were microscopic, and were felt, not seen, but they felt like a warm breath of energy. With every breath, his weariness lifted. His burn felt better, his bullet graze felt better, everything felt better. He pocketed the canister and jogged down the street to the east, past the subway morgue. The West 31st Street checkpoint was up ahead, but it was snowed in and shut down like the one at 5th Avenue. There were abandoned taxis and garbage trucks to the sides of the streets, covered with snow, and there was an opening in the brick wall to the north, an alley that had been prettied up for the renters of the apartments. As Klein walked up the street, he saw a flickering glow, and then the dark shapes of 3 cleaners coming around the corner and turning to come down his street. Even though he was better geared, Klein didn't want to take on any unnecessary fights. He had been shot at and burned enough for one day. He took the alley to the north before they caught sight of him. There were cheery Christmas lights wrapped around a couple of trees and a small pergola. There were patio tables and chairs, even a barbecue grill. But most of the furniture had been tipped over or pushed aside. There were huge piles of trash in the corners and against the walls, despite the garbage trucks in the street. At the end of the alley, Klein found a door into the building. Inside, there was tasteful carpeting and 2-tone wall treatments. but the carpet was filthy with boot prints and dried mud, and there was trash strewn up and down the hallway. Coincidentally, there was an entire pile of clothing someone had discarded. The only clothing Klein needed now was maybe a warmer hat, but of course, there were no hats in the entire pile. Someone had blocked off the stairway with furniture, and there was a piano sitting askew and blocking half of the hallway for no apparent reason. Klein frowned and cautiously kept his gun on the corners as he moved around the piano, but there was no one hiding behind it. He opened the doors at the front of the hall and went out into the street. There was a big Guy Neath billboard on the north side of the street, casting a small white glow that was consumed by the snowflakes blowing past it. The street below was lit only by a few old street lamps. Half were broken. Klein followed the dark street to where it opened up at Broadway. There was movement up ahead. Klein took cover and hit his pulse. The pulse revealed 5 targets milling around where 6th Avenue and Broadway intersected in between Greeley Square and Herald Square. They were cleaners, and there was an engineer with them. He tried to sneak to better cover, but the engineer spotted him and lost no time in setting up a turret to put some fire on Klein. Luckily, the turrets weren't terribly accurate or fast, so Klein was able to dodge and sprint and take cover to evade it until he could shoot it up, and then the engineer. The other 4 cleaners heard the shots and set up to attack. One bellowed a muffled war cry through his mask as he charged at him with a riot shield. Klein had seen this tactic and shot at his feet, causing him to stumble. Without the shield, it only took a couple of shots to put him down. Klein moved to take cover behind a booth or a kiosk or something, and took out another cleaner with a burst of fire. Abel's store was just north of them, and there were more cleaners near the entrance that heard the commotion. Klein had put down 3 of the first 5 he had seen, but 3 more were running over, including another engineer, who ran to position behind cover and set up another turret. One of them yelled, "Just give up!" Klein didn't reply. It would be nice if he could just tell them what he was doing, convince them to go with him. They could save the city together. Instead, he saved ammo by taking out the engineer first. The turret went berserk after the engineer was no longer controlling it, shooting a few cleaners before its internal magazine emptied and it blew a fuse. Klein was able to take out the rest of the group, and the rumbling howl of the blizzard reasserted itself as the echoes of the gunshots died. He was starting to feel more like his old self, aside from his elbow. He didn't have the gear and weapons that he was used to, but his gear and weapons were a lot better than what he had started with after the crash. "Don't get cocky, asshole," Mirror Man piped up in the back of his head somewhere. "That's when you make a stupid mistake and get yourself killed." Klein walked on, looking up at the jolly storefront of Abel's through the driving snowfall. A magical season was displayed in the lights across the front entrance of the grand department store. It had been ground zero for this whole mess. That bastard Amherst had started the spread of his virus in there. One man thought he was smarter than everyone else, and that there were too many people in the world. Klein stopped and looked around. Herald Square was named after the New York Herald newspaper, which used to exist at the location. There were boxes of airdrop supplies sitting in Herald Square, but the statue of James Bennett Gordon Sr., the founder of the newspaper, still watched over the streets at what used to be a busy intersection of the city. The world-famous window displays of Abel's were either broken or shuttered, and Klein knew that there was fire damage inside. But it still stood. Would they fix up the place and cater to the crowds of New York again someday? Or would they tear the place down and make a memorial? The wall of the Dark Zone rose up behind him, blocking the view of the Empire State Building. But everything was still there. There had been so much death, but the city could still recover. Someday. He could still make a difference, though. Right now. Tonight. Klein walked around the square looking for anything useful. He stopped as he saw the second engineer on the ground, noticing something different. The guy was wearing a homemade pom-pom beanie, a fluffy ball at the top of the knit beanie that resembled a pom-pom. It had been knit in blue, red, white, and green, and showed a message across the crown. Best Daddy. Klein inhaled sharply and looked away. It was hard to shoot men that were just trying to survive. It was easier to think of them as deluded maniacs, which is how he usually thought of the cleaners. Seeing the message on the beanie made him realize that a lot of these guys were doing what they thought was right, as husbands, as fathers. Klein couldn't help thinking of Linda and little Kaylee. They had named their baby girl after a sweet, sunny character from a sci-fi TV show. He wondered what was the name of the girl that had made that pom-pom beanie for her dad. He wondered if this man's daughter was still alive or not. Mirror Man turned to him. Why do you think he became a cleaner? His daughter died from green poison and he couldn't find anything better to do. Klein supposed that was more likely than anything else. He knelt next to the man, closed the man's eyes, and took the beanie respectfully off his head. Klein stood and looked down at him for a few moments as the snow fell around them. He turned away, put the beanie on his own head, and took a breath. It was time to go over the wall. Isaac chimed. A message flashed across his HUD. An agent has entered the dark zone. Klein stopped. He wasn't in the dark zone yet. That wasn't him. After a moment, he realized what had happened. There's someone else. Klein gasped, started to sob, then cheered out loud with relief. He slumped down onto a bench and took a few deep breaths. He knew he was going to accomplish the mission, but it felt so good to know he wasn't alone, even if he couldn't contact the other agent at the moment. Klein stood up and pulled himself together, then jogged to the drop-down and pulled himself up. He could already hear the jammers interfering with his Isaac. It was a strange, distorted buzzing sound that happened every time anyone on comms got close. The army had set up jammers to stop drones from going over the walls and taking pictures of everything going on inside, or folks from sneaking inside and sending pictures or videos out from the smartphones. Although he knew how it worked, it still made it much creepier, as if technology broke down around the dark zone because of the tormented spirits inside or something. Klein pulled himself up to the break in the fence and braced himself as he heaved himself up and dropped down. The distortions and buzzings intensified for a moment, and then Isaac said,
Transmissions jammed. Proximity coverage only. Backup activated. System rebooted.
This had happened 100 times before, every time he had entered over the past month or so. But as Klein stood up, there was something strange. There were portable light and sound units all over the city, basically generators combined with telescoping arms that extended vertically to elevate lights or loudspeakers and cover a broad area. There was a portable sound unit right here at the drop-down, and that was normal, but there was a large pool of red next to it. He had almost dropped right into it. As he looked up, he saw a body strung up on the sound unit and realized the pool of red was blood. It was an agent's body. There was an axe embedded in his chest, and his right hand had been chopped off. With the amount of blood everywhere, he must have been hung and axed while he was still alive. This had not been a quick death. There were horrific scenes of violence all over Manhattan, and especially in the Dark Zone, but Klein had never seen anything like this. This was something new.
Thank you for listening to this section of Beyond Survival. Written by Matthew Shields, narrated by Mark A. Davis. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. More chapters coming next week. Until then, stay frosty.